What if the biggest business opportunity isn't some hidden tech breakthrough, but the food we never eat?
A third of the food that we produce never has a chance to be eaten. That's quite crazy. And then you have like 800 million people who don't have enough to eat chronically every day.
Welcome to The Capitalist Hippie, the podcast where we challenge the old rules of business to build something better. I'm Marco Pimentel, marketing expert, entrepreneur, and lover of bold, sustainable ideas. Every week, we dive into data-backed insights, groundbreaking ideas, and real-world strategies that help you outthink and outmaneuver the status quo. Food waste is a global crisis, massive, measurable, and mostly ignored. But in the right hands, it's also a lever for rethinking food systems, equity, and impact. This week, we're joined by Jenny Du, co-founder of Apeel, a company harnessing nature to tackle food waste at its source.
We also asked ourselves, how do plants protect themselves? And it's really through the formation of Apeel. They are there in different thicknesses, whatever the interface is, between that fruit or vegetable and the rest of the world around it.
What if the solution wasn't about creating something new, but reinforcing what nature already perfected? Let's find out. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Hi, Marco. Thanks for having me.
So Apeel is a venture-backed for-profit, yet its value proposition, I'd say it's been rooted and fundamental around sustainability and food waste. And food waste we've covered in a lot of different episodes with a lot of different guests. And it's just an annoying thing because you would just be like, why do we waste so much food? But we do. But it started with a $10,000 prize. It started in a lab and it's now grown into a $2 billion climate unicorn. What was the original idea? Was it to create a business, or was it really just to start with, what's a solution to this problem?
Definitely. It started from a solution to the problem perspective, especially as scientists in an academic setting, probably not at all innately wired to understand how to, quote unquote, monetize anything, but hopefully have some cool solutions or helpful solutions to some important problems. And so, we were inspired by hearing about how big the food waste problem really was. And it was something we were totally oblivious to. And maybe most consumers are. We kind of go about our everyday business and with little appreciation, I think, for what it takes to actually feed everyone and the challenges that is embodied in that. And so really when hearing about it the first time, it was just this thing that you can't unhear, we often say. A problem you can't unhear, and a cool kind of a translation of the area in which we've been studying, where we felt like, wow, we might have some skills and knowledge to be able to apply to this problem. And then it became more of a business when it's more than there's a realization, wait, there's value in this perishable product to begin with. So is there value in giving it more time and giving more than ability for folks to get more use out of that perishable product? And that's then how it sort of gained a little bit more of a business set of legs.
And I guess that's happening already in all different kind of supply chains of food production, is to always try to get it to somebody quicker so something lasts longer. But you kind of pinpointed something at a different point that nobody else was thinking about. We often talk about food waste, but how big was a problem? And I guess some of that, what was that kind of aha? This kind of happens across everything, right? From farmers to packaging houses to growers to in your house. This is a big problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's when we just think about it on the macro sense, for all foods, a third of the food that we produce never has a chance to be eaten. That's quite crazy. And then you have this kind of on a separate hand, 800 million people who don't have enough to eat chronically every day, let alone there's other layers of food insecurity, not just from a chronic hunger perspective. And then for us, I think especially being surrounded by specialty produce, which is really fruits and vegetables, for where we're located in Central California, thinking about everyone could stand to eat more fruits and vegetables, but then you learn that those categories are amongst the categories with the highest amount of waste. So then it became this sustainability meets health intersection, I guess, of a variety of different factors where there was so much opportunity we felt like to do good. And while we started with maybe a single and central sort of core problem or opportunity, that there could be really like layers to that if it could work well.
And how did you break out from the lab and into, okay, this is a startup? And what was that kind of chasm there? Like, how did you cross that?
So it started first with the courage really of our founder, James Rogers. You know, he, as part of a new venture competition at UCSB, had, I think I would say, like, give birth to this idea and then pressure tested it, I guess, with that investor, entrepreneur audience. And then ultimately, I'm his first hire along with another friend and fellow lab mate, Luis Perez. And so it started off with these, you know, you get a $10,000 prize, like you said, sort of two $5,000 prizes from UCSB's venture competition. And before you know it, it's gone, right? Like the cost just to incorporate the organization, maybe file something provisionally for intellectual property protection, just to give yourself permission to talk to other people then about the idea and seek some support for it. So that was the starting point. And, you know, it's timing also plays a big role. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had a call for proposals seeking solutions for in order to reduce post-harvest loss and waste in sub-Saharan Africa. And so a $100,000 grant was able to be obtained as a successful application to that program. And that was really helpful for, in a way, like gaining a little bit of credibility, de-risking maybe the first few seed investors who might get involved, because now you've had a third party have a chance to take a look at the problem and the solution, the proposed solution, who would have expertise in that area or the ability to judge that. It's helpful that the grant funding is non-dilutive as well.
This funding pathway is worth noting for any climate founder. Non-dilutive grants don't just provide capital, they create third-party validation that de-risks those critical first investor conversations. It's not about avoiding venture capital, it's about creating the right conditions for it to flow in at the right time with the right expectations.
That's kind of a first domino that falls in order for maybe the private investors, angel investors, to take a look at it, and that just shifts the perspective a little bit versus starting totally from scratch.
Yeah, and great to have the grants to get started, to be able to do that. For people listening, like, what's the core technology? You had this idea, and like, what does the product do?
So going back to the waste issue and fruits and vegetables, we just asked ourselves at first, I mean, it's so naive because we just don't come from food and ag as our background. We are chemists, material scientists, and engineers. And so we just had to get smart on the topic, but start from zero. So asking ourselves, first of all, why do fruits and vegetables spoil, or how do they spoil? And so the drivers are environmental. You can think of like losing moisture, especially after you pick a piece of fruit off a tree. It's not sort of connected to the original, source anymore. So it's drying out. It's also living and breathing objects. So it's also oxidizing by exposure to oxygen as it's breathing. And or it could be attacked by like pests, for example, so mold or something like that. Very sort of typical avenues for decay. And then we started asking ourselves, well, how are fresh produce protected today? And so we see very strong, effective reliance on refrigeration. So it's very important. You'll hear in best practice, like you want to pull stuff off the field, get the heat off of it, cool it down as soon as you can. And if you're lucky enough, you're able to maintain the right degree of cold. It's not the same degree of cold for all fruits and vegetables, but to keep that all the way as long as possible to extend its life. Or You might have to use post-harvest fungicides. Maybe waxes have typically been used, but maybe more for shine, for marketability. A lot of packaging and atmospheric modification. And so I think we had felt like, wow, there's so much that as non-food and ag folks, we felt like we've heard so much on almost like the pre-harvest side of things, had heard so little on the post-harvest side, and felt like there was room to bring something new or some new thinking to that area. And so while most people would want the latest space-age novel materials in maybe your phones, in your cars, that's probably not what folks feel comfortable eating.
This is such a brilliant example of innovation through biodesign. Rather than creating something entirely new, Apeel studied what already works in nature and amplified it. The business insight here is powerful. When you're asking consumers to trust you with their food, familiarity isn't just a marketing advantage, it's a catalyst to adoption.
We also asked ourselves, how do plants protect themselves? And it's really through the formation of Apeel. They are there in different thicknesses, whatever the interface is, between that fruit or vegetable and the rest of the world around it. And so we looked at, what are those peels made of? And that's kind of ultimately what Apeel is, to answer your question. It is using ingredients that are found in the peels, pulp, and seeds of food that we eat already every day and plants that we eat already every day, and applying them to the surface of fresh fruits and vegetables, really to reinforce the existing natural peel in order to help it protect itself from this moisture loss, oxidation, and to try to kind of stave off, infection by keeping that produce inherently healthier for longer or more resilient for longer.
So with this idea and with the initial product, I'm going to guess is the next step was you had to get a lot of funding, but then you also had to get, I'm guessing, a lot of regulatory approval.
Yeah.
How long did that process take, and what did you do to kind of get through that process in terms of kind of funding? Is that kind of your first initial, let's do a family friends round or a Series A? Is that what started to kind of get there to get the approval side of things done?
Yeah. So we had a seed round, and that was really mainly angel investors. Then that kind of led the way or paved the path for a Series A that ended up being venture capital led. And yeah, it was true. I mean, we had to, first of all, get material in hand to even demonstrate the proof of concept that this could work. And you can find these ingredients. They are already food ingredients used in other foods as well, too. So I think that's really important, is Apeel's not something new and novel that sort of suddenly showed up. It's we're taking food ingredients already present in foods, already used in other foods, but it's a new use of those ingredients. But there's a whole family of these fatty acids. And so we didn't really know how specific this formulation might have to be or how tailored it would have to be for different fruits and vegetables. So there's quite a lot of R&D that had to happen, and we tried to really make these molecules ourselves in a more kind of controlled environment in order to get the technical and the purity specs down for what we felt was really important for this technology to work, and then use that as the point to not just demonstrate the proof of concept that it could work, but then create the data set for regulators, to demonstrate safety and efficacy. So, all in all, that's just the regulatory process itself can take over a year. And especially we went through the process of wanting to publicly notify the FDA, for example, of this use. And that for us was important to us and to our customers from a transparency perspective. And then very quickly, because specialty produce has this really global footprint, especially if we're going to have, as consumers, year-round access to fresh fruits and vegetables, but yet they're seasonal, and so you have stuff kind of moving around. So then we had to actually very quickly also approach other markets and gain regulatory approvals there too, in order to really build out the supply chain and make this product available in a way that was relevant to the retail setting.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to break down how does it work from kind of lab to grocery store in terms of your customers and then the kind of financial gains, because that's the thing is like this is obviously going to cost somebody some money to be able to put this on top of your produce, and so who kind of pays for it, and like obviously everybody would end up gaining from this because if fruit and veggies last longer, everybody's happy along the entire chain, but I guess somebody has to take the risk on the cost initially. How does that whole flow work in terms of kind of customers and business model work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's been a very tricky question for us to unpack. So when we first went to the industry, the fresh produce industry, we approached the packing houses. And what I mean by that is after fruit or like a fruit or vegetable is harvested, it maybe sort of sent to, or it's potentially co-located to like a warehouse where it is washed, maybe sorted by size, shape, color, whatever, and then packed up before being sent to the next person in the supply chain, like a retailer. And so we went to them first because we figured, well, that's where they're going to have to also use the product. You know, this is when the earlier that you can apply the product, the greater the benefit throughout the rest of the length of the supply chain. And your question's super on point. We had people say to us, well, this sounds like an added input. Also, like, waste is kind of a good thing for me. Like, as soon as someone else accepts it and it moves its way down the chain, like, it's not my problem anymore. And if they throw less away, wouldn't they come back and buy less? And so we were like, oh man, like we gotta, these incentives are really, different from maybe what we expected them to be.
When one player's waste is another's profit driver, technology alone won't solve the problem. Apeel had to map the entire value chain to find where their solution created the most compelling business case, not just the most impact. This isn't just a food waste lesson, it's a playbook for really any industry with fragmented incentives.
So with that early feedback, we then approached, the customer who we thought would be our customer. We approached their customer, which is the retailer. And in that situation, it's like, well, would they be the next ones kind of stuck holding the ball? And especially when produce is displayed often at ambient temperature, maybe unless you're like the salad section, but for the fruits and vegetables that we were looking at, it's at ambient. So now you've broken this, like, I've got to keep everything cold because, well, consumers, except for special things at Costco, don't really want to go into a cold chamber to shop. We felt like, okay, there's maybe something there. And you also have retailers with a much stronger and a more public corporate social responsibility stance and priorities. And so we were able to connect with that to some extent to get started and get commitment to a couple of pilots to get going to really at least demonstrate the efficacy of the technology, the performance of the technology, and then use that as a way to go back to the supply side of the supply chain in order to gain a little bit more adoption. Because understandably, they're kind of like, do folks want this? Like, who's, if I pay for this, like, is that going to result in, somebody else actually like wanting that?
Yeah, so like the idea there being is like, as a consumer, I have a relationship with my retail grocery store. If I buy an avocado or if I buy some cherries, my connection is to that grocery store. And if it's spoiling or wasting, I'm going to connect it to the grocery store. I'm not thinking about that packing house two levels back thinking, oh, they did a poor job along the process. So because of that, was it the early retailers that wanted to do the pilot saying, yeah, let's test this. Let's see how this impacts our ability to extend this. Customers are going to be happier. They're going to get a better experience from us. And then that experiences drives them to say like, hey, cherry producer, I have a cherry orchard as well. So I kind of know this. I know the steps. Hey, cherry producer, you should be spraying this so that it's lasting long. And then we'll buy from you. And then we'll tell that story to the consumer. So I guess the purchaser of this, has it changed along the way, or is it still really retail led?
I would say it's changed along the way. It was retail-led to get started, which I think was really important to kind of getting a foot in the door in the market, almost to be given an opportunity to show that this could work at scale. But then there's other weird things that happen once you get a little bit deeper in there too. So you have, let's say, a produce buyer who's maybe more driven and measured and rewarded by buying at the lowest cost while ensuring the volumes and certain other quality type attributes, but not actually, let's say, something on like waste. And it ends up being the quality department or some operations department that gets dinged for waste. And so you have a little bit of a challenge there. And I think, what we didn't expect was that on the supplier side, they had been so used to, they've always been the ones who maintain their relationship with the retailer. And suddenly this technology provider comes in and gets in between all of this. And so, that created some friction, which we've had to try to overcome with regards to suppliers kind of feeling like, wait, are you a product for us or are you a product for the retailer, And then what's been, I guess, really important to try to also overcome that was there's much greater benefit when more of this product can actually be used on more produce. And so we had suppliers sharing with us, it's actually very constraining. If I can only treat produce that's only going to select retailers, it really hamstrings them from a flexibility and operational flexibility perspective. You have these weird seasonal sort of ups and downs, or maybe you have some sort of supply chain sort of crisis that doesn't let them adapt. And I think what we just learned over time is this actually may make more sense on the holistic scale to work more closely with the supply side than the retailer side. Retailers also may sometimes change, who their relationships are with because of pricing RFPs and some of this other stuff. So we felt like there was basically more stability for everybody and more operational flexibility and benefit if we could move more to working with the supply side, the packing house, as our customer directly. So that's been a shift that we've been trying to make.
And has that been a big piece of the kind of unlock in terms of your growth? Because you've obviously grown to quite a few countries, a lot of different packing houses. You've been growing a lot. So is that kind of the unlock?
It's a combination of both. I mean, I think wherever there is retail interest, that sort of reduces friction for adoption. But then you do have folks who produce, whether people like it or not, travels a really long way to get to us, especially if we do have an expectation as a general consumer to have selection and availability all year round. And so I think there are folks who want to help produce, give it some extra legs to make the whole trip, for example. So where there is long distance shipping or something like that in order to meet consumer demand, then, stuff like that has led to a greater, let's say, acceptance or a desire to explore a technology or a solution that can help folks improve quality on arrival and improve quality as it moves through the supply chain.
Yeah. Let's talk about success, because you've had a lot of it in terms of just the success of what the product has given certain types of fruits and vegetables along the supply chain. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that kind of been surprising and obviously delighting in terms of, some of these kind of certain segments or certain customers and what they've been able to see because of this, because of their product?
Yeah. I would say what has been surprising in a pleasant way, and it still surprises me, is the concept of adding a little extra peel to reinforce the existing peel really works for dozens of categories. And so just from a pure technical perspective, that would be what we would have hypothesized, but it's cool to see it generally work that way. And so then the hard part is more how do you integrate that into the supply chain based on how things are handled for a specific category today. So something like strawberries it's actually where there's probably so much value for everybody, consumers included, to gain by having longer shelf life. Reasons would be are the varietals sometimes that are available. It's like, oh, they look great, but they don't taste like anything. And it's like, oh, it's because it's the one that like ships well right now, like sadness. And even if you had that, you get it home and if there's, it's like you look at it the wrong way and 2 days later your whole strawberry clamshell is molded and you paid an arm and a leg for it. It's just like, heart crushing. So, but what's interesting is like strawberries get picked directly out of the field and get put into that clamshell. And it's just that they're so delicate. And so, first of all, amazing, right, that they're basically all picked by hand, as a lot of fruits and vegetables are, put into that clamshell. And there's no easy way to intervene with some kind of a step, at least not after harvest, for example. So that's like a puzzle that, we'll continue to work on, is how to like address that in a scalable way. But for other things, I think everyone's had that challenge with the avocado. It's like been memeified, right? It's like, buy it, it's like too hard, you wait, and then it's great for like a half a second, and then it's too far gone. And like, it's really amazing for us that you can take something that might have had a day or day and a half of peak ripeness, where you're really like, this is like perfect, cut into avocado slices, instead of like, I might need to sacrifice this to my guacamole gods, like, but open that up to like 3 or 4 days, like, man, you're going to actually have a chance to use that. And those aren't cheap either. Other areas that are cool has been the opportunity to eliminate the use of plastic packaging. So where cucumbers are typically shrink wrapped in that plastic, and it's there to try to help reduce moisture loss, etc. But being able to replace that plastic with an edible plant-based material like Apeel has been, something that we're like super excited about, trying to kind of grow the acceptance and adoption of that. And it's been a long while. We've got to sort of figure out other operational things, but we've been able to show that with some categories like asparagus, like I don't think people realize that sometimes that gets air freighted to us at certain times of the year, but can you move it to shipping it by boat, which would be way less energy and emissions intensive.
Because it has more time.
And still get it, with the same or better quality on arrival, so you don't have to compromise on those things. So those are just like a handful of things that we're excited and proud of, and continuing to, find a way to grow.
And on the consumer side, and I guess like the marketing side, like consumers, it seems like obviously they say there's a lot of waste at home, but you, like you said, with the consumer is like they're just buying avocados, or they're just buying asparagus, or they're just buying cucumbers with a plan that they're going to hopefully use it this week, and then all of a sudden they can't because it's gone bad. And obviously consumers do have to take on some onus of you bought something, so you kind of committed to using it. You should use it. But at the same time, it seems like solutions need to kind of just meet consumers at the table, and it just be easy for consumers, because not everybody wants to make changes, or not everybody wants to be thinking every single day about that their avocado might go to waste right away. So how do you work with the consumer side? Are you working to help get this word out to consumers? Is it the retail doing it? Is it like who's helping to kind of get the word out that there is consumer demand? Like, why aren't I going to the grocery store saying, do you have Apeel on all of these things?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really great groups that are out there trying to do a fair bit of consumer education related to behavioral aspects, so nonprofits and that sort of thing, like Refred and WRAP and some of these other organizations come to mind. What we've found is challenging with regards to messaging ourselves, or even as retailers directly to consumers about Apeel, is that most people don't know what's on their produce, have very little, ourselves included, right, until we started walking down this path. And so the basis for like a foundational sort of starting point or understanding is very different from what we expected. And so when we have communicated about Apeel, actually most people respond super positively, and others felt like, wait, what? Like, what is this new thing? What's going on? And it's just because there isn't something else to compare it to. It's like as though like, well, something's just suddenly on my fruit. So that's something that we've been trying to work our way through, is like how to provide information to consumers about who we are, why we do what we do, how we do it, how to talk about what else is used out there, not trying to actively like denigrate the existing industry either, because it's gotten us a long ways in order to help with that acceptance. But right now, like food misinformation is just almost at like an all-time high, or just like the mistrust, is very high. And so that's something that we're trying to figure out, is how to cut through that noise and how to reach consumers with really credible messengers of information.
Yeah, which I think is just an incredible difficult thing right now, just in media in general. And I was listening to that. I don't know if you heard that TED Talk as well, but it was like a Harvard digital forensic media scientist saying that half of all social media is fake. So you're like, oh, well, that's great. So how do you compete with all of that? Yeah. It makes it very, very difficult. So you've raised, I think it was over $600 million to date. And where does that spending go towards? Because I'm assuming you're not doing the actual fruit intake. You're working with suppliers. So where do you spend most of your money? Is it on team? Is it on research? Where is the kind of the investment kind of going over the next kind of three to plus years right now?
I would say we've kind of had a go-to-market V1, and we're trying to pivot to a go-to-market V2. And go-to-market V1 was very people and capital intensive, just to almost like break onto the scene. Because there was an uncertainty as to whether or not there was really like efficacy, to, a desire for a technology like this to extend life, because like I said before, the incentives and what folks felt like they were measured on was something different. We took an original approach that was very, I would call it like hand-holding. Like, hey, we're going to provide the staff that oversee the application of the product. In fact, we'll even provide the equipment or the equipment upgrades that are needed to adapt your processing facility to do a treatment with an Apeel product. And that was very, we're not sort of talking about like something that sort of fits on the kitchen counter at home. Like these are whole sort of warehouse type of installations, moving tens or hundreds of containers of fruit kind of thing. So that was really where a lot of it went, to just bust out in the market and show that there was value here.
This transition from will it work to will it scale is critical for climate tech companies. The first version of go-to-market is about proving the technology works in the real world, almost at any cost. But the second version is about proving the business model scales.
A lot of the work now is actually to streamline and simplify a lot more of those things, kind of work within still the same family of plant-based ingredients, but make some small tweaks that reduce the amount of time and energy it takes to kind of like dry the formulation. In fact, remove the need to really dry it, for example, at all. How do you literally drop a container of the solution that's ready to use, and you don't need a bunch of sort of staff to do any sort of special handling on site in order to make it usable for the customer, adapt it so that the pre-existing equipment to the largest extent possible can be used, so that there isn't a capital investment that needs to be made in order to accommodate the Apeel product treatment steps. So that's like been a lot of it. And then we went with a really wide global footprint at the outset, just really following these supply chains all the way back to the retailer, and then, asking ourselves, like, is that the right way to have ourselves maybe as spread right now versus like, let's get really great and be everything to, a subset of customers, rather than, I think scattering ourselves a little bit too much. So that's kind of where we're headed next.
Yeah, get into that next phase of growth by kind of honing in on the process, the product, all that feedback. One of the things that's really interesting is, like I said before, you're obviously a for-profit company. You're venture-backed with expectations on revenue and growth and valuations and all those kind of big numbers and pressure that comes with a business like yourselves. But you saved a lot of fruit and vegetables. Like, there's a ton of impact there as well that, is getting, the market is getting captured. Everything from, I'm sure, from water to lots of usage. Like how do you look at that piece when you're also, first and foremost thinking about valuations and revenue, but you are so impactful?
We appreciate that the original thesis that we could help reduce waste generally remains true. It's to varying degrees, maybe in different supply chains, because there's some nuances to them. But, overall, it's like, hey, if we give everything more time, does it have more time to make it to where it needs to go? And so what's been cool about that is you can, in a way, like the data to get that has also helped us be a better business. Like we know, for example, what is the energy or the footprint to manufacture our product, to mix it, to apply it, to dry it. So there's just sort of our own footprint. And then in really getting to know our customers and their supply chains and actually running these all the way through to these pilots that we've done at retail or following people into consumers' homes even to see waste impact in home, we've got sort of these other data points that we can map to. And then that's ultimately how we come back and say, like, wow, when we can avoid the waste of, when we've, for example, cut waste at retail by 50% in some category, here's what that really translates to from the inputs and the water that it took to grow that fruit in the first place, move it through all these things. Here's how it had to be handled. Well, and then you subtract even out what it took for us in our own footprint, like what's left over, and to break all that up and say, wow, like where are the biggest hot spots? Where do we think we might have actually the biggest to gain? And that leads to efficiencies for us and cost savings for us, kind of other ways to have impact and kind of figure out how customers can make better use of the time in their own supply chains. So it's been a win-win, I would say. Those things, they all have like an embedded cost, whether resource-wise, monetary, time, whatever the case may be. And so those have just been really helpful indicators of different like levers for us, I guess, to make some improvements.
Mm. I have to ask around AI because I know that you're using a lot of data. You just talked about tracking all of this. You acquired Impact Vision. You developed Ripe Track. How important is that kind of feature, and how important is it to understand all that? Because what you just said is like that's so much data to follow that whole story all the way across. How important is data and AI into the kind of the future of your whole business stack?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's like super important. I think for us, we have benefited from collecting a lot of ground truth data, basically, over the years of developing and evolving the product. We were collecting, just as an example, just a lot of produce quality information, country of origin, age after, packing and at different sort of steps. What was then the impact to some of those quality parameters once Apeel protection was applied? And then actually being able to measure the outcomes of that by following produce to end of life. And that's been a really powerful basis for models and predictive models to help others. There's been some cool like offshoot benefits. I mean, at first it was, wow, we can create time through, or give more time through our formulations, but information along the supply chain so like opaque to each other at different steps. What happens if you can provide more visibility to that so that you can actually make good use of that time? And so that's how we felt like these technologies would go hand in hand. And then what we're kind of learning as we're going through that is like, man, produce quality monitoring and just quality control is itself a destructive, time-consuming process. It's like a hidden source of food waste. And so we developed the tools first to help make better use of the time that we felt like we could create. And you could arguably still make use of that time that you have without the Apeel protection. You would just have more of it if you did use Apeel protection. So it's not a prerequisite that you necessarily use the Apeel protection. But then you've got all these other interesting operational benefits and considerations that have just revealed themselves to us as we've spent more time getting user feedback.
Well, I'm sure at some point, there might be a technology company inside as well in terms of software and being able to license this to others as you keep building. I have to ask, you're very obviously rooted in food waste and the solutions that you're working with, which I'm sure keeps you up at night. What are some of the things that you're also seeing that maybe people are under investing in when it comes to food waste that needs more attention?
It's like where to start. This is like a difficult nut to crack, but there are a lot of incentives and policy proposals coming forward that help on the diversion side of things. And that makes sense. It's like, hey, this might have gone to landfill, I've donated it, or I'm going to divert it to like composting or something like that.
Yeah.
And
or you juice it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like I understand why it's almost like more straightforward or tangible to build some incentives and programs around that. But like no one's getting credit for prevention. So that's one that we're trying to figure out a little bit like how to crack.
Markets consistently undervalue avoiding a problem versus fixing it later. The companies that break through don't just sell prevention, they package it with immediate benefits that customers can see and feel today. That's why Apeel's focus on quality and shelf life, not just waste reduction, is so strategically sound.
What's cool is we've had consumers ask us, hey, if the supply chain's incentives are kind of misaligned, like, why don't you skip that and come straight to us, And so that's quite interesting because so much, at least in developed markets, a lot more of the waste happens at retail and restaurants and in homes. And so, wow, is there an intervention that makes sense actually? And you sort of, ideally, the earlier you would have applied the product, the greater the benefit over the time. But it's not as though there's no benefit, even if you just did it right at home. So that's an interesting one to explore to see if there's more that could be done to help with waste at that consumer node. And then separately in emerging markets, though, where maybe the refrigeration cold chain like infrastructure is it's maybe not available or it's not as reliable, it's very expensive. There, the waste numbers are totally shifted. Like they're like in field and just trying to get to market, and folks are maybe less likely to waste at home. So how do we adapt the technology to make it more suitable for some of these other contexts? Because I think we'd have just such a greater like sort of total impact there. And I think it's not getting easier with just climate and other challenges emerging. And so there's quite a bit of these small holders, more diversified growers, just offering different selection of crops and varietals that I just think is like underserved right now.
Jenny, that was a great conversation. It was really great to dive into everything that you've built and the team has, of course, built. You have a $2 billion valuation, I think, as of late. You've raised $635 million, I think I'm correct there, from Gates, Oprah, Temasek, like some big names. So that must be like pretty intense to pitch this. How do you pitch a business that's both wildly technical and also mission-driven?
Great question. And I know the funding environment has totally changed maybe since the time at which we raised that. But I do think that there are core principles that remain the same. It's like the technology, of course, has to work. That's like table stakes almost. There has been, I think, of course, a bit of an education to help folks understand this is very different from building a software company. So this term like deep tech, where I would say we're making something tangible, just has a very different timeline and structure than like a software company, in the past or of common day would sort of look like. And then I think it goes back to like, is there demand? Where are you seeing sort of business indicators? Are you on a path to getting the unit economics of that to make sense? And I think we're fortunate that the problem that we're trying to solve can have that double bottom line. So I think the business fundamentals, the things that we would be judged against are not different from how other investments or companies would be judged. And so I think there's like that aspect of, call it just the nuts and bolts of the business and the technology. I think we're also, I don't know, I think to really think about the relationship with your investors as a long-term marriage. Folks who can be a source of financing are not all made the same. So I do believe that a values alignment with your investors is really important for them to see in and believe in the same mission too. Otherwise, I think it, can cause problems a little bit beyond like a honeymoon phase. So
yeah, they could become a lot more patient, and they believe in that value, and they believe in the long-term kind of objectives a lot stronger.
Yeah.
As Jenny shared, the challenge isn't just technical. It's about shifting incentives in an industry where waste has been acceptable as inevitable. Let this conversation serve as a reminder that transforming entrenched systems starts with asking better questions. Thanks for listening to The Capitalist Hippie. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who believes business can solve the problems it creates. Until then, we will see you next time.